this lecture will be on migration and settlement in American history. The purpose of this lecture is to give you a foundation of historical knowledge and understanding, and to allow you to know the the time periods that we're going to talk about and what's going on there, the groups, the locations, and what have you. So as we start to move on into the other lessons, and we're dealing more with primary sources and secondary sources, this is something that you're going to need to fall back on for that knowledge, for that understanding, for that evidence. Um, or part of that evidence. You do have a notes sheet that you have opened up along with this. I have included links in that note sheets for enrichment and for further research. So if if you're really interested in Columbus's life and legacy, I've linked something there. If you are interested to see about the legacy of Christopher Columbus and how it was still relevant this summer, I've linked a news article there. If you're looking at contextualization for that big gap between British North America and the United States as an independent country, I've linked videos to like the American Revolution, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution. Remember, we will get to those, but they just don't necessarily fit into this theme. All right, so just a couple things here. Remember the focus is the impact of the clash of civilizations on the historical narrative. We do have a couple questions and prompts that we want to focus our learning on discussions. Remember, the big picture question is history static or can it evolve? The supporting questions, and we're going to get into this first one today, is how does society shape the lives, choices, and opportunities of individuals? We'll get into that today, and we'll get a little bit more into it tomorrow or the next class period. And then we have these other two. Please make sure, write these questions down in your note sheet or type them up. That way you have them there as a record. And these are the writing prompts that we're going to come to over and over and over again, hopefully many times throughout this unit. All right, this unit overview, I've just given you I've kind of broken it up into some topics here. So we're going to look at Native American society prior to contact with Europeans. We'll look at the causes of migration of colonial North America and later the United States. We'll look at the impact of migration and internal changes on American life. And we'll look at voluntary versus involuntary migration. And within these categories, I've listed out some things that you might, some like specific topics and whatnot that we might talk about, all right, or include in your notes. So this would be like the evidence that you will be expected to know, right, on a quiz or whatnot. All right. Also, this is something that you want to possibly come back to a bunch of times. This is like the things that we're going to talk about in this lecture. This is a timeline. So this is what's happening in the order in which it's happening. So, this is something when you're looking at this slide, you might have to go back a bunch of times to this, and that's okay, right? That's expected. That's why I have it here. And then another thing just to kind of make sure that you're aware of, pictures, maps, and images that I use as well. That's something that you're going to have to come back to a bunch of times as well. All right, so don't be afraid to jump around in this PowerPoint presentation, and go back to these things over and over and over again when you're looking at primary sources or you're asked to do activities. That's expected. All right. So the first thing here, remember the question that we're dealing with right now, how does society shape the lives, choices, and opportunities of individuals? And so one of the things that we like that we talked about yesterday is the power of the single story and how language, right, really shapes or has the ability to shape what we think, right, or how we remember things. So let's start off with that right now. North America on the eve of European contact, or North America on the eve of European invasion, right? Does it make a difference, in that choice of words, contact or invasion? How does that frame, or impact how you view this time period and what happens during this time period? So just something to think about and play around here with today. All right, so Let's look at the setting here. The setting that we start with, North America on the eve, right? Right before Europeans start to come over. Um, we're going to start around 1450, and we're looking at the upstate New York area around Lake Ontario. And so I am going to go back and forth. You'll see a couple times with this image. This is something that I have attached to your PowerPoint. And so we're looking at right up here, right? This is where the setting is going to begin, right? Right here in 1450, this is Lake Ontario, right? New York. And so we're going to be dealing, when I deal with Native American societies, I'm going to be pointing here, I'm pointing here, I'm going to be pointing here, and I'm going to be looking up in Virginia over here. So these are the areas that we're going to be talking with or referenced in here today. This is linked to your PowerPoint, so this is something that you might want to pull up as well. All right, so this setting starts with, and I'm minimizing this so I can go back and forth a little bit, but it starts with two Native Americans or Native American individuals, right, from two different nations and tribes. Hiawatha from the Mohawk Nation and Dekanana Weda from the Huron Nation. But both of them are from upstate New York. And so basically what was happening here is the way the story goes is that Hiawatha was out, butchering a fresh kill. He was confronted by the stranger, and the idea here was like the stranger presented him with a solution. Why don't they try to engage in trying to correct the problem that had created this thing? Why don't they start trying to work together? So these two guys meet and they propose like, why don't we start working together? Um, Anyway, that meeting happens, and the occasion, but well, that's not important, but the occasion of the meeting, um, and the conditions that led to it, were part of this far-reaching change that is important, that was taking place throughout all of North America. Um, so basically, what's happening here is that we see a lot of environmental change, changes in the weather, and changes in the access of the accessibility of certain resources that are impacting various Native American tribes at roughly the same period of time, and it creates this condition which really alter or impact the way Europeans see or perceive Native Americans. And that's going to really impact then the way that the conditions that Native American tribes and people are living in, which is relatively recent. When the Europeans come and make contact with them, really has long-lasting impacts because it really impacts the histories of Native Americans for years on past. So what's going on here? What is this long-lasting change that's taken place throughout North America, and how is it impacting these different Native American groups in various parts of the country? So the Iroquois are once again they're located, all right, up in this northeast part of the what is now today the United States. So like we're talking about like upstate New York, the western part of New York, that area. So the Iroquois, they had lived for generations pretty peacefully, really self-sufficient as far as growing, living on corn that women grew, and then the game and the animals that the men hunted. Warfare was pretty infrequent. Famine or the lack of food was all but unknown. But just in the years prior, we started to see some changes in the weather that made corn production less dependable. So to survive, people were forced to hunt and gather more wild foods to really supplement their diets. And as you started to see people like hunters roaming more deeply into the forest, they counted others who, like themselves, were desperate to harbor the diminishing resources. So as we see the accessibility to resources diminish and get smaller, we start to see groups of people that had used to really live alongside of each other, as they come into contact, we start to see conflicts emerge, right? And so we started to see conflicts become more common. Feuds with outer nations and feuds with brother nations, feuds of sister towns and feuds of families and clans made every warrior a stealthy man who liked to kill. So we started to see, because of these changes, the Iroquois started to, really become their whole way of life, right? And how they behaved towards each other and those who they came into contact with was greatly altered. The next group, people that lived in the central Mississippi Valley, right in here, right? There was a town called Cahokia, right? It's located right here along the Mississippi and Missouri River, so right there, like the middle part of the United States. What happened there is that they started to experience a long string of both natural and human caused disasters. We started to see earthquakes that caused damage, the weather change uh, that started to happen, combined with like this intense farming, led to massive flooding, mudslides, and crop destruction. So as we started to see, right on the eve of Europeans coming into contact with Native Americans, people in the Mississippi Valley, right here, right, they are starting to stretch out, right, and they are starting to reorganize themselves, right, because of those natural and human-made disasters that had occurred in their city, right. And so that is a change that was happening just recently in the middle part. In the Southwest, the Anasi or the Pueblo people, right here in the Southwest of the United States, they started to experience some climate change as well. And so we started to see farming decline. We started to see hunters, right, become more prominent in the society. And as we start to see those resources become more and more scarce, not only do we see conflict becoming more prevalent, but we also see, as a result of that, we start to see confederations, right, or groups or alliances of tribes aligning with each other or against each other. So once again, right, you know, these relatively recent conditions are reorganizing and reshaping society, of this, or the societies of Native Americans, at the same time, or roughly the same time, Europeans are about to come into contact with them in the 1600s, or the 14 and 1600s. Um, and then last but not least, the Powhatan in Virginia, right? Same thing, right? More climate change was putting pressure on food supplies. And what we saw happen out of that is that we started to see this chief, who's going to be known as Powhatan, right? Chief Powhatan, he's going to essentially establish this huge confederacy. And it's really like this 30 village alliance that covered around 8,000 square miles, that could field anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 soldiers, right? Once again, this was a result, and this was a change that Powhatan experienced as a way to navigate and deal with those changes in the accessibility of resources, and how to navigate through a new society environment, which access to resources was key, and conflict that arose out of the competition for those resources was key. So Powhatan forms this huge confederation, right? And he has this huge army now, that is ready to go at any time. And now we started to see, right? Once again, this is a new society that Europeans are entering in the 14, 15, and 1600s. A relatively new way that Native Americans have structured their societies and their way of living and their interaction with each other. So it's just something really fascinating to think about, that, if we don't talk about before, it completely changes the way we look at the contact between Native Americans and Europeans.